All right, well, if you haven't been with us, we've been looking at the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Old Testament as we're touching on archaeology in the Bible. Just by way of review, we mentioned that the oldest copy of the Old Testament that we possess is the Aleppo Codex, about 1,000 years old. But then we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this goes back about 1,300 years earlier than that, which closed the gap in terms of transmission history. So now you have, if you look at a chart like this, you can see that we are looking at something over 1,000 years earlier than this, nothing in between. And so the question is, did we have now what they had then? And as you compare a very complete document like this of the Dead Sea Scrolls with the later copy from which our Old Testament is translated in English, you find there's almost no change whatsoever, 95% agreement. And that's remarkable. We talked about how the scribes who passed this on to us, who copied these documents, did very careful work. You can see we have a lot of documents of the Old Testament preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, not complete documents, partial, but we have some witness to what they had and to what they thought was more important. Certainly books of the law, books of prophecy, these were the ones they considered most important. And I focus on Daniel because we're going to look at that just shortly in terms of what it has. So we mentioned last week that one of the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls for the study of the Old Testament is help in resolving critical issues. And we started, I thought I'd review this just one more time. When we come to the book of Isaiah, some current scholarship, I don't mean necessarily evangelical scholarship, but I mean the broad secular scholarship looks at Isaiah for different reasons. Literarily, they divide it into multiple authors. So as they look at the text itself, some of it because it contains predictive prophecy. If you have the assumption that there's no supernatural, there's really not a God, if he is, he's aloof and no one knows, he doesn't involve himself with us, then no one tells the future. It has to be written after the fact in order to understand the things it's really saying. So if Isaiah talks about things related to Israel in the first part, and then talks about the Babylonian captivity, he had to be a Babylonian captive in order to have written about what happened. He can't predict it having happened. And we mentioned that this is the theory that presumes. So they divided up, and they believed there was a break between chapter 39 and 40. But when we come to the Dead Sea Scrolls, we don't have that. We have a scroll in which you have chapter 39 here, and it goes up here, and then it just continues on to 40. You say, well, maybe they didn't know how to make breaks. They didn't have chapters and verses and divisions back then. Well, but they do. They do make a distinction where something starts and ends, different kind of pauses. So they could have, if they had wanted to, if they'd even known that was a theory they should have held, but it wasn't. So really, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a unity to the whole book. And of course, when it comes to the New Testament, Jesus cites equally from the various parts of Isaiah and attributes it all to Isaiah as an author. So if we trust Jesus, he knows what he's doing. Same thing with the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is very controversial because critical scholars have said that it was written in the mid-2nd century BC. Well, that's a long time ago. What's the problem with that? Well, because they read it as non-prophecy. They don't believe that's possible. So when they see things in it that sound predictive, they have to date it late enough for those events to have already occurred. And so we have, I didn't do this last time, I'll do this time. Here's an example of that. For instance, in Daniel 11 and part of 12, it deals with a coming ruler in the Middle East who will oppose other kings and dominate the Jewish people and do various things. And here's a passage where it talks about this king who will do as he pleases. He will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. He will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. The indignation, by the way, was mentioned in Daniel chapter 8, is a time of God's discipline on national Israel. And so it would be very strange if that were finished already in the 2nd century BC. It began probably only right here in the 6th century BC. But it says, for that which is decreed will be done. And he will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god. People have made a lot of that because it says he'll show no regard for the desire of women. Simply, the text is simply saying he doesn't care about anything but himself and power. In other words, it goes on the next passage, his God is a God of might, military fortresses, things like this. So it's not saying he doesn't care for women, it says women don't matter as much as this. Okay? Neither do any religious thing. He's not a religious guy, he's a military guy, he's after power. And nothing else is going to affect him. So the scholars, here's one of the leading scholars in commentary that actually is evangelical. He goes on and talks about this and refers it to Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And he says here, this may be an allusion to Epiphanes, God manifest, the use on his coins of the title God and divine symbols, plundering temples. It's characteristic Hellenistic kings associate themselves closely with religion in various ways to support the position. On he goes. So he just assumes already a Maccabean origin for Daniel. Here's the coin he's talking about. This is one out of my collection, but what you can see if you read Greek, and I know Jim can, it says Basileus Antiochou, and then over here it says Theon Epiphanu, okay? Which is translated King Antiochus, God manifest. Epiphany, Epiphany, we get that around Easter, the appearance of something, okay, so manifest. And then the last word, Nicanor, is victorious, something like that. So this guy's proclaims it. So it's on the coins, it's in history. Why isn't it this? Well, one reason is when we look at the Lord Jesus speaking on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him when he talked about that you not see one stone here left upon another will not be torn down when they were touring the temple. And that to them, could be the end of the world. I mean, if the whole temple comes down, that's it. And they said, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And Jesus answered them and said to them, and now I'm jumping to verses 15 and 16, he says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, and that's in Daniel chapter 9, all right, but also again in Daniel chapter 11, okay, where the very passage we're talking about. It says, let the reader understand. When you see that standing in the holy place, let those who are in Judea flee the mountains. Well, here's an issue. If Daniel was writing about things fulfilled 200 years before the time of Jesus, how is he saying Daniel's talking about something yet to happen? Yes?
All right. Confirm something for me, please, Randy.
Okay.
When the temple was destroyed by Titus in 69 AD.
70.
Oh, 67. All right, sorry.
Yep.
Not bad. Okay. The temple was just destroyed. They didn't sacrifice any pigs on the altar or anything like that. They just got mad and burned it down.
No, and what Daniel's talking about is neither a destruction of the temple. He's talking about a desecration of the temple. Very different things entirely.
Thank you very much for that information.
But all I'm saying, here's the crisis for us. If Daniel has already fulfilled prophecy, then how is Jesus interpreted as yet future? So that makes Jesus wrong in his handling of the book of Daniel. Beyond that, Daniel is just, some unknown figure in the Maccabean era, not the Daniel that it's written about in the text from the 6th century BC. And yet Jesus calls him the prophet. See what he says down here? Spoken through Daniel, the prophet. The only other text that talks about Daniel as a prophet are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are written in the 2nd century BC. And if it was fulfilled in their time, or even before their time, then it wouldn't have been considered a prophet. But that's just from our thinking. Now let's look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have 10, maybe even 11 fragments of Daniel. These Qumran fragments for Daniel, I've listed the different caves they were found in. Cave 1, Cave 4, I think there's one here's from Cave 6 too. So these are all different, and these are the portions of scripture that are in those fragments, fragmentary texts like that. And let me just here talk about this. At the time this was written, there were only 8 manuscripts that were known, but it says, these are significant. First, they attest to the reliability of the transmission of the Hebrew text. Second, they confirm the originality of the dual Hebrew-Aramaic use of languages, because Daniel is, outside of Ezra, is the only book we have that uses both Hebrew and Aramaic. But it doesn't use Aramaic because necessarily the people read Aramaic. It's because these are decrees in Persia at the time, where Aramaic was their language. So it's more of an historical note. He's writing in Aramaic because he's writing about things that happened in the court and citing decrees of the various rulers. Third, they suggest that apocryphal additions to the book of Daniel are not original, because, as you'll see in a minute, there are apocryphal additions. You have them in the Apocrypha itself, one called Bel and the Dragon, another one called Susanna. There's different things like this. Yet, Jim?
I don't know if this is the point you were making, but the fact that he did speak in Aramaic, does that kind of help date it, that it was an early date, not a late date?
Well, because Aramaic continued to be used after the exile, it actually became probably, some people argued, the more normative thing for the Hebrew people. Okay, so they would say that Jesus spoke Aramaic, everybody spoke Aramaic, not necessarily. Okay, because when we come to the New Testament text, it uses the term Hebraoi. It says it's the Hebrew dialect. And someone says, oh, but the Hebrew dialect is Aramaic. Well, no, not necessarily. We have lots of things, and the Dead Sea Scrolls would help with this too. They have a lot of just handwritten correspondence and letters going back and forth in a colloquial Hebrew called Mishnaic Hebrew. And it shows that Hebrew is very much alive at that time. And we have things continuing through the 1st century and beyond. Then Hebrew is preserved through prayers and through poetry and through various other things far after that. But Imperial Aramaic, which is the Aramaic of the Neo-Babylonian and Persian Empire, is reflected there. There are Greek words also in Daniel. Not Greek words, but terms that people say were borrowed from Greek. And they think that's a problem. But Greek goes way back as well. So it's when did these words enter into the conversation? These are all more technical debates on this. All I'm trying to say that from this point, the date of Daniel is important. It's important for us in terms of the integrity of Jesus' own statements, of whether Daniel is a prophetic book, and he's actually a prophet. He's the one who wrote it. It says, fourth, they point to a date much earlier than the mid-2nd century, and thus before the time of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Because that passage I read in Daniel 11 is referenced in part of the book of Revelation with respect to the Antichrist. So is this the Antichrist, or is it Antiochus Epiphanes? And certainly one can be a sort of type of the other. That's not a problem. But we're talking about, in terms of there being one meaning and one fulfillment, which one would it be? And so, we also, down here further, we have fragments of kind of like commentaries that mention Daniel among the Dead Sea Scrolls, as well as different types of pseudo-Daniel or apocryphal thing. Daniel had already been received, accepted, copied, distributed, and it's a hard thing to get a book like this accepted among the Jewish community because they are very picky about it. The other thing is, here's a fragment. When we looked at this fragment, you can only see partial words here. The one on the bottom is Elohim, the word for God. But in the other text, it's not. It's Yud He Vav He, but they've already, for some reason, in one copy substituted a different term. Okay, so when you have variants enter into a text when someone's copying it, it has to have time for that to happen. So, and then this is a copy of Daniel, and you can look already at this scroll and see all these little changes that are being added and stuff to the text, which means that happens again over the course of time. So could Daniel have been a Maccabean origin? Well, no. Their assumption is there because, again, they don't like the idea of predicted prophecy. They simply read it as an historical text looking back on the events they think happened rather than looking forward. This author says, first, if it's true that 4Q Daniel, that's Daniel from K4, dates to 125 BC, and the original autograph, as proposed by scholars, was 164 BC, it hardly allows enough time for the book to have been read, accepted as canonical, distributed, and finally to have gained the popularity that it obviously had at Qumran. There's 10 copies preserved there. One scholar has put it this way. He said, it seems very difficult to perceive that one single desert community could have preserved such a significant number of Daniel manuscripts if this book had already been produced at so late a date. I mean, right while they're still a community. I mean, they started maybe 200 something BC, and and while they're a community, someone writes this, and they have to. The large number of manuscripts in this community can be much better explained if one accepts an earlier origin of Daniel, the one proposed by the Maccabean hypothesis of historical critical scholarship, which dated to the late 2nd century BC. It doesn't matter if you go 100 years earlier, whatever you do, it already puts you in predicted prophecy because you're before the time of the Maccabean events. All right, so they're trying to date this immediately after the Maccabean revolt. Okay, 164. It was 167 through 165. So if you do that, it doesn't matter how, because you're already there. So why not go back to the 6th century BC like the book says it is? Because what does it make a difference? It says, compounding this difficulty for 2nd century BC view of Daniel is several non-biblical writings that have surfaced at Qumran that either allude to or refer to various themes or subjects in the book of Daniel. This too argues for a much longer time between the original autograph of Daniel and these other writings in the Testament period. So I'm just showing you, yeah, this is a little technical for some of us, but it's important to know, because if people are arguing that Daniel is after the fact, then it has no prophecy whatsoever. Jesus is wrong in his statements. Paul also. Paul cites from Daniel 9 in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Okay, so you have a lot of this. So what's the fact? Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls have helped us make the argument by showing us they had already these manuscripts in place, and they had to have been later. Here's where we were getting to the beginning of class last time. This deals with a text in Psalms 22. Psalms 22 has this verse. It deals with a suffering servant of God, but not the one in Isaiah. This is David. It's clearly a psalm of David. He talks about suffering, but his suffering goes all the way to the point of death and beyond. So it's significant that David must not simply be speaking of himself. And so much David himself saw himself as sort of the one who lit the way, was a lamp in Israel for the coming of the Messiah. A lot of his psalms, a great number of his psalms, are messianic. Psalms 2 being the first of those. So here it says, the dogs surround me, a gang of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. And that sounds very much like crucifixion. So the Christian interpretation of this psalm has been a prediction of crucifixion already back in the First Temple period, the time of David. The language is prophetic in that sense. Now, where did the Christian interpretation get it? Well, from the Septuagint. This is the Septuagintal text. And the term rutzon, or rutzon, is a word that means pierced. Just like you drive a nail through something, that kind of piercing them. piercing with a sword. Okay, so already we had from 250 BC a text, which was a Greek text, and since the lingua franca of the day was Greek, and the New Testament was written in Greek, it was obvious that the Christian community, particularly the Gentile Christian community, would adopt the Greek Old Testament for themselves. So that was clearly there. However, we come to the Masoretic text, all right? And the Masoretic text talks about, for surrounded by these evil guys and all this stuff, and basically the key word is here, ka'ari. It says, my hands and my feet. Yadai leglai, okay? My hands and my feet. But it doesn't say pierced. The Masoretic text, and here's the Jewish Publication Society translation: dogs surround me, a pack of evildoers closes in on me. Like lions, my hands and my feet. Now this is an interpretive thing, they say, they maul at. I've seen others say, like lions, or my hands and my feet, meaning that lions' paws are swollen and big. Okay, so there is animal imagery in the text, and you have that, but there's a big difference between like a lion and they pierced. So what's the difference? How do we get there? Well, we had the Septuagint. We had to say the Septuagint is a translation of the Hebrew text. We don't have that Hebrew text, but obviously there was a Hebrew text, because they're writing 200 years before Jesus ever comes on the scene, even before crucifixion is practiced by the Romans. So if they put pierced there, they had to see it in the Hebrew text from back in. We don't have that Hebrew text. So, but now we do. Okay, from Nile Hemmer, we have the Dead Sea Scroll text, and if your eyes are really good, you can see, I think I made it a little, I put it up here, but it's just like this, okay? So, let's see, all we have is red up here, and black. Well, okay, I'll do it this way. So, we have ka, this is what is in the Masoretic text, and this is what's in the Dead Sea Scroll text. So this is ka, ri, okay, and this is ka, ru, okay? And the only difference is this little yud here has a little more of a tail on it. That's it. And in the Dead Sea text, it's not even like this. It's just kind of like a, and then this is just like that, okay? So, and that's the difference between reading it as a lion, this is the word as, and this is ari, is a lion, or that it's a noun, or as a verb, ka'aru, they pierced, all right? So you can see, if we're being generous to the scribe, that he could have a text that was kind of worn. And it was originally this, but as it's worn, it's not as long as it was, and his eyes look at it, and he just puts the, or being not generous, we could say there's been 1,000 years of disputation with the Christian community over this whole issue of Jesus being the Messiah. And one of their proof texts was Psalms 22, which they said from the Septuagint read, ka'aru, they pierced. So when the official authorized version comes out for the Jewish community, and we don't have any other text, we have just this, it now reads ka'ari, which, shall we say, takes that off the table and helps preserve the Jewish community from those kind of problems.
Just to be clear, that leftmost letter of each word, those marks are different letters. The little mark and then the longer mark, those are different letters.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a Y-O-D-H, yud, right? which is like a Y, and this is basically a Vav, okay? It's supposed to be a Vav, which is the
Like a V.
could be a W or a V, depending on where it stands in the word. Okay, soft or hard. So, and it clearly makes it a verb. So here I've done it a different way for you. You can see it. I've kind of outlined it. I did it that way to show you, but here's the text, ka'aru. It clearly reads it, okay? So now we know where the Septuagint got it. That was the Hebrew text behind the Septuagint. So you can argue that there were two different manuscripts out there. One had a Vav and one had a Yud. Or you can say there was a misunderstanding by the scribe. Whatever the case, we now know where it came from. So we have that evidence. That's without the Dead Sea Scrolls, we could have argued the case from the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, and from the context. Okay, it makes better sense. One reason they had to add Maul in there is because every other use of animal imagery is the enemy against the suffering victim. So it'd be strange to all of a sudden say his hands are like animals, because that's his adversaries being described that way, not him. But yeah, Jim?
So you're saying that this fragment here is a Dead Sea fragment, and that fragment has the word that we're interpreting as pierced.
Yeah, there's no question. It says that. There's no vowels in Hebrew at this point, but ka'aru, there's your, see it there? That's the Vav. That's that makes it third person plural. They pierced, okay, in terms of a verb. So.
And so what you said is that before we discovered the Dead Sea Scroll, we still had the argument, the argument.
But it was strengthened by the fact that we now have a Hebrew text that backs up the Greek text. Okay, everybody clear on that? All right, ka'ari, ka'aru. Okay, now you can take your picture with the full thing. And by the way, if any of you want any of these PowerPoint slides, I can make them available to anybody, anytime. Just ask. So let's move on to the Great Isaiah Scroll. Okay, now, as I said, this is a very complete scroll. Comparing it, there's about 95% agreement with the one over 1,200, 1,300 years later. That's our Masoretic text. But there are differences, and these are the kind of differences in the way letters are written, or in consonants, use of, for instance, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you see this all the time. Can you see down here? This is how we write the name of David in the Old Testament. Okay, David. But in the Dead Sea Scroll text, they put a yud in here. Okay, so now it's with vowels, David, and there's no question, because you have other words like dog, means generation, or something like that, in there. There are other terms. So to make it clear that we're talking about David, as people may have lost certain aspects of the language, by this period they put the yud in there. So certain consonants become vowels, and they're used that way. So you see that in this Isaiah scroll too, because it's from this later period than Isaiah, but much, much earlier than the Masoretic text. Then there's grammatical forms that are different, and some different words and omissions and things. That's what we're going to look at. Here's some examples of things. In Isaiah 6:3, the Masoretic text says, Kodesh, 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 holy, holy, holy. But in the Qumran text, it's just holy, holy. Oh, what's the difference between, the holy, holy, which is a dual and then a superlative? It's anytime you make it once more, it makes it much more than, okay, is the idea. So it raises it to a different degree. In Isaiah 12:4, Masoretic text says, you plural will say, Qumran says, you singular will say. It doesn't change the meaning, it's just this is what's there. In Isaiah 37, it talks about waters, and the Qumran calls it strange waters, And it borrows that from 2 Kings 19:24, because that was already in the scribe's mind. But these are minor things. That's the kind of things that you see. But we'll look at some helpful changes here. In the Masoretic text in Isaiah 33:8, it says, he has broken the covenant. He has despised the cities. He regards no man. Okay, so it has Arim cities. What is that about? And despise the city. I don't know. I guess that could be something. But in the great Isaiah scroll, it says, the enemy has broken the covenant, has despised witnesses, and has regard for no one. So it's a slight difference, just one letter difference, okay? But it's the difference between the words cities and witnesses. But the reading from the Dead Sea Scroll makes more sense in the context. For this reason, most English translations adopt this Dead Sea variant. We're not looking at the whole context of Isaiah here, but you'd see that it's talking about that. Witnesses makes more sense than cities. So it could be, again, a scribal problem. Here's one of the, yeah.
In that case, it was a more significant change. It wasn't like the Yod and the Vav.
Right, no, it's a significant change, yeah. A tet and a, yeah, I mean, in a, I don't know, it's not that, in a resh, what is it, we got,
Yeah, Resh.
yeah, that,
Resh.
you can see in the way they made them, okay? Resh would have been like that, and then a thing would have been kind of like that, so just missing part of the letter. They're very similar, but nevertheless, here's an important. So this is Isaiah 53:11. It says, as a result, and Isaiah 53 is talking again about another suffering servant, identified in the text as one who will intercede for Israel, who will bear the iniquity of them, who will take their place in the judgment of God for the nation, it says. And it says, as a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many as he will bear their iniquities. Right?
Dr. Price?
Yes.
On the bottom line of the Hebrew text, why is the line so long?
Remember I said when we talked about how they lined it out with columns, and everything had to fit a certain amount. So I said sometimes they stretch the letter to fit in there, because you'll see that many times. Okay, so here is a translation of the Dead Sea Scroll, Great Isaiah Scroll. All right, I'll just say it says, he will. What we're looking here is the result of the anguish of his soul. He will see it and see what? Okay, it doesn't tell us. It just says he will see and be satisfied. But when we come to the Dead Sea Scroll text, it says instead of he will see, it says he will see light, or. Now, what's that about? Well, only in a relatively small number of places does the scroll differ substantially from the Masoretic text. Prime example of the what we call Proto-Masoretic text. If there is a text that is like the Masoretic text, it's going to be this one. Okay, so it's very good. That it does so here, reading he will see light, or, and by the way, the Septuagint, the Greek version, already before this had phos. We got a word photo from this, okay? Light. So it was already in, someone already had that in some Hebrew manuscript, but not in the Masoretic text. And it adds significant weight to the argument for the authenticity and originality of this variant. In addition, a text with the reading Yireh, or, that is, he will see light, is liable to suffer in transmission due to the graphic similarity of these two words. We should allow that the second word is indeed dropped out accidentally through what we call doubling of stuff, apocryphy, and as in some witnesses. If we accept he will see light as the original, an explanation of why some manuscripts lack the word light suggests itself. Due to the visual similarity of Yireh, okay, and or, I mean, you're looking at it, the same letters are basically there, okay? A scribe could have written year A, that is C, then glance backward to the wrong place in the script, the text before him, the exemplar, mistaking light for the word just copied and thus omitted light by accident. So this is being charitable if we do that, okay? It's charitable if we do it that way. But, again, if you've had 1,000 years of arguments in royal courts, bringing a rabbi in, bringing a Christian leader in, and they're arguing over pivotal messianic text, and they bring this one out, you can see why they would want to admit that word, because what does that mean? If you put light, he will see light, the light of life. He's just been killed. And all of a sudden now he's seen life again. And he's going to have, it's still in the text because he will prosper and he'll have, you know, offspring in the sense that he'll have people that follow him. So Jesus rose from the dead. He saw the light of life after this. So, you know, you want to kind of, shall we say, keep that again to the minimal in a discussion if you can say it's not there. But see it doesn't make sense. See light is there. And it was already in the Greek text.
By the way, the word "it" is not in there, that's just how we translate it.
What's that?
It says, he shall see.
No, it's not there.
The
Right,
word "it"
right.
is not there. It's just-
Yeah, with Hebrew you have to supply words sometimes because they're bound up in the idea, but they're not translatable, so we have to supply it. Okay. But light is not a word they supplied, it was in the text originally. So this is the idea of resurrection. And so again, is this a mistake or was it an intentional error to protect the Jewish community from Christian interpretation? Don't know. Yeah.
Why is it called Great Isaiah?
Because there are more than one. The Great Isaiah scroll is the most complete. And there's another Isaiah scroll that's like maybe 2/3 complete. So this is kind of like the better Isaiah scroll, the Great Isaiah scroll.
So the 2/3 one is also a Dead Sea Scroll?
It is. It's Isaiah.
I understand.
Yeah.
But it's other two scrolls.
Right. Found in the same cave, by the way. All right. Here's some other little things where we have some time. For instance, here's a problematic text in 1 Samuel 11, 1-6. It says, Now Nahash, the Ammonite, came up and besieged Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh Gilead said to Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve you. But Nahash, the Ammonite, said to them, I will make it with you on this condition, that I will gouge out the right eye of every one of you, thus I will make it a reproach on all Israel. And so you're reading that, and you say, now why did Nahash require that the right eye be gouged out? That doesn't make sense. Something's missing here. And the Septuagint, again, which is abbreviated LXX, that's Roman. Most of you are old enough to have been taught Roman numerals. It's not something that's being taught as much today. But, you know, L is 50, and X is 10. X plus 10 is 70. So there were 70 elders, Jewish elders, who translated from the Hebrew to the Greek, and that's why it's called that. All right, so both in this case, the Greek version and Josephus, a first century historian, give additional information about this requirement. So here is the scroll of Samuel that came from Qumran, I think cave 4. It adds additional paragraph which explains the purpose and requirement of mutilation. So here's what it says. And Nahash, the king of the children of Ammon, sorely oppressed the children of Gad and the children of Reuben. And he gouged out all their right eyes and struck terror and dread in Israel. There was no one left among the children of Israel beyond the Jordan whose right eye was not gouged out by Nahash, king of the children of Ammon, except for 7,000 men who had fled from the children of Ammon and entered Jabesh Gilead. And then our text says, and about a month later. That's what you'll find in your Old Testament text. So the reason for requiring, the guys who got away and didn't get this punishment on them, only way he'll make a covenant is if he gets to finish the job, so to speak. And why the right eye? Because most people were right-handed and they drew the sword and the shield's in the left. And if your right eye is gone, then you only have your left eye, and you're not going to be able to fight. You're going to have to change your whole technique in fighting. So that was his purpose. So here's Flavius Josephus, the first century historian. He says, he writes this in his Jewish Antiquities. After 1 month, the war which Saul had with Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, obtained him respect from all the people. For this Nahash had done a great deal of mischief to the Jews that lived beyond the Jordan by the expedition he had made against them with a great and warlike army. He also reduced their cities into slavery, and that not only by subduing them for the present, which he did by force and violence, but by weakening them by subtlety and cunning, that they might not be able afterward to get clear of the slavery they were under to him. For he put out their right eyes of those who had delivered themselves to him upon terms, that is, covenant, or were taken by him in war. And this he did, that when their left eyes were covered by their shields, they might be wholly useless in war. So that's the idea. Because you'd be blind yourself, you couldn't see. All right, yeah.
So you were saying there's this extra paragraph, that's kind of like a commentary that they just added to the Septuagint, right? In other words, when they did the Septuagint, they might have added these extra explanatory notes.
Well, that's what we're about to talk about that. Okay.
No,
So
and that was a
I'm
question.
taking you behind the scenes into how people who translate our Bibles or deal with these issues understand what they're doing and why you have differences sometimes in your text. And it doesn't affect the outcome of anything. Interpretation is something necessary. This is just explanatory. But the fact that it existed in the Septuagint, which is supposed to be a translation from the Hebrew text, calls our attention to something that's missing in the other Hebrew text we have, which is much later, the Masoretic text. So here are options. It was omitted from the original text by a careless scribe. It has been suggested he confused the last words of 1 Samuel 10:27, but he kept silent with the opening words of 1 Samuel 11:1. It's contained in some of the Greek copies. About a month later, so they look very similar in Hebrew. These two phrases might have caused the scribe to skip from the end of the first phrase to the second, omitting 4Q Samuel paragraph in between. Now, as I tried to explain in the last class, the scribes did very careful work. While this might be true for you or I, in trying to copy a document, and we go, oh, I left that out. Oh, I doubled that. Oh, it's not the case for them. So while that's an option, I don't think it's the best option. It says here, or 1 Samuel may have, this is the Dead Sea Scroll text, may have resulted from a scribe copied a text that had an explanatory note added by another scribe for clarification, resulting in the longer version of the text. Although possible, such scribal accidents are difficult to accept in the light of the strict rules of conduct of the scribes, is what I said. So here's another one. I'm just saying, we have that addition, and in some of our Bibles, they will have that added in, maybe in a different font or something, because the Dead Sea text. And Josephus had to get it from somewhere too, and he's very strict about his sources. He's not going to cite something as part of Jewish history if it really isn't. But okay, in the end, what difference does it make? Not a lot, but I'm just showing you why these differences exist. Here's Exodus 1:5. All the persons from Jacob were 75. That's what you find in the Greek version of the Old Testament. And in the book of Acts, it says in Acts 7:14, 75 persons. So as in Acts 7, you have Stephen recounting Jewish history to the rabbis themselves, okay, who are about to stone him to death. He draws his number for how many people with Jacob came out of Israel into Egypt, and he uses the same number. So why does that matter? Because That's not what you find. See, you see in the Dead Sea Scroll text, they both say that. 75, 75. Both the fragments we have from cave 13, they call it, and then cave 1. Both are from cave 4, rerun. They both came from the same place, but they're different fragments, but they both have the same thing in agreement with the Septuagint. Now, how many persons came out of Canaan and Egypt? The Masoretic text reads 70 persons, not 75. Well, okay, what do we do about that? Well, how many really came out? Does that matter? If this is an authoritative text, inspired by God without error, how can one say one thing and one say another? And as I say, the New Testament agrees in this case with an older Hebrew text, not the Masoretic text, in quoting 75. So those are our variants. I would say in this case, because we have a text in the Septuagint, and we have Stephen, who is obviously aware of that, citing that, and now we have Hebrew text from Qumran, which are only, in this case, probably 150 years or so before Stephen, that's the original reading, 75. And that makes a difference, by the way, if you're doing chronology, okay? You're doing your chronological studies, trying to put things in place. 5 years can make a difference. Here's one from Deuteronomy 32:43. In our Dead Sea text, it says, "Shout for joy, O heavens, with him, worship him, all you divine ones." Could be, in this case, angels. "For he will avenge the blood of his sons, he will render vengeance to his adversaries," blah, blah, blah. In Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 6, it cites this passage from Deuteronomy 32. It says, "Let all the angels of God worship him." So, this is, "Worship him, all you angels of God." It says in the Septuagint. So, what's going on here? Well, where did the New Testament get this verse? Because it's not in the Masoretic text. Here's the problem. The Greek text of Hebrews 1:6 reads, "And when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, 'Let all the angels of God worship him.'" This appears to be a citation from the Old Testament. There's no such text in the Masoretic text at all. There is in the older Greek version of this, "Worship him, you angels of God," but the Masoretic text reads, "Rejoice, O nations, with his people, for he avenged the blood of his servants." Okay, by comparison, the Masoretic text lacks the entire sentence related to angelic worship. However, the Dead Sea Scroll text of Deuteronomy reads, "Shout for joy, O heavens, with him, and worship him, all you angels, Kol Elohim," all you divine ones, you might say, all you gods, literally. "For he will," and by the way, angels are referred to as gods. That's what it's, the whole argument from Genesis 6. But you find it in Job, you find it in here. So that's the term Elohim is used.
Right there where you're at, is Elohim also a word for angels?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. In the book of Job, it calls the angels of God Elohim. In Genesis 6, when it talks about the angels who did not came down and how's it go?
Yes.
Sons of God, okay, B'nai Elohim, it says. So it uses that sons of God. Jesus even refers to this in a passage in Psalms. I think it's Psalm 69, if I'm right, but he talks about the unrighteous judges. In Psalm 69, it refers to these unrighteous judges who stand in the place of God, bringing divine verdicts because they're put in a position. Remember, it says in Romans 13:1, all of the leaders, all the government officials have been placed there by God because they're doing a work for God, okay, as judges in his place. So in Psalm 69, they call them Elohim. And in John chapter 10, when Jesus is at the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah, he's there, and they confront him, and they say, "You being a man, make yourself out to be God." And he says, "Do not your own scriptures say you are gods?" Okay. Then his point is, if the scriptures call them gods, how much more is it right for me to use that term of myself, okay? Who the Father has sent into the world. So he's making a greater, lesser to greater argument here. Okay, so the point is, the passage that is being cited in the New Testament doesn't even exist in the Hebrew text as we had it until the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls show that we did have such a text, and in the time of Jesus, that was the Bible he knew, and the disciples knew. Okay, and just okay. There are other things we could go into. Our time is out. Let me just run here. There's even, I would say, an entire psalm that is added. Somewhere here. Psalms 151. We only have 150 Psalms. There's 151 when you come to this. And the question is, you know, is this legitimate or not? The ancient church actually adopted this. You find it in certain early church things in Old Latin and Syriac and things like that in the Bibles. Where did they get it? We only knew about it when the Dead Sea Scrolls came, but it was already here. It's in the Greek, it's in that, so it's a question of what's original. Could be, not be, but anyway, let me just go to the end of this, which is the next slide. And that is this.
The slide you're on said that the Hebrew Bible that Jerome used, that was probably about 300 AD, wasn't it?
Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah, and he got, I mean, he didn't have a Hebrew Bible. He had to go to the rabbis and learn Hebrew, and then he translated from that, whatever text they had, the Latin Vulgate. So that's why the Latin being translated in the 4th century AD is important, because it reflects the Hebrew text we didn't know. It disappeared. Okay? It's like all these other languages, Syriac and Coptic and Ethiopic, and all these were translated from Hebrew texts that no longer exist. So to get the understanding of Hebrew read, you have to read them.
And I think your slide said that it was that 151 was missing from Jerome's copy.
Yeah, there's all. So I just kind of pulled the veil back to show you what scholars do, what they wrestle with on these things, but how the Dead Sea Scrolls are a great asset in helping us solve certain problems. You may not even know were problems, but now you do. Okay. But Josephus put it this way: we've given practical proof of our reverence for our scriptures, for although such long ages have now passed, no one has ventured to add to, remove, or alter a syllable. And it's an instinct with every Jew from the day of his birth to regard them as decrees of God, to abide by them, and if need be, cheerfully die for them. Okay, now obviously there were changes, maybe unintentional, maybe intentional, whatever the case. But in general, this is the way the Jewish community approached their scriptures. They came from God, and as a result, you don't mess with them. Okay, all right.
But at the time that Josephus wrote that, all these things were in his Hebrew text. You know, everything we talked about this morning was probably in his text. Nothing had been lost.
Right.
It got lost later.
Right. Well, lost is a. We don't know what happened. Is when you copy a manuscript, the manuscript you just produced is superior to the one you copied from. So you go with it. You don't necessarily care what happens to this one, but preservation is not as important. With the Dead Sea community, it was, because that was their library they were working from. We don't know. I mean, for as I said last class, no religion that I know of has the autography, the originals. They only have copies. And when you go back in time, the greatest works of the ancient world, whether it refers to Roman world or Greek world, we have copies of copies of copies, sometimes 1,000 years later copies. Okay? But when we come to the Hebrew text, okay, we had copies that were back 1,000 years. Now we have them go back over 2,000 years. And with the Greek New Testament, we have stuff within 100 years. And we have 25,000 manuscripts for the New Testament, for the Old Testament, probably 5,000 to 6,000 with the Dead Sea Scrolls. You could change that a lot. I'm just saying we have far more than any other type of history, literary document that exists in the whole world. These things were treasured and preserved and passed on and transmitted so that we have the reliability of the scriptures, where other people simply have, you know, best guess at what it really said. But, you know, no one questions Cicero or Plato or Aristotle or, you know, any of these things, because our Gallic War, they just don't. But when it comes to the Bible, they question it, because the Bible's authoritative. It's something that can change your life.
Excuse me, last week you were talking about the University of Kentucky with
Yes.
the Pompey scroll.
Right, and you
stuff,
sent me
and,
a copy.
I would say there was a article on FoxNews.com just
So
this past week.
Grant, who is the guy behind doing the digital unwrapping, is the one working on the scrolls from her clan, which is like Pompeii. These were all carbonized scrolls that came from an archive there. They've known about them a long time, but they couldn't do anything about it. You just got a piece of charcoal. But now there's still the faint imprint of letters in there. Can't touch the scrolls as such, but you can shoot this beam through it.
Yeah.
And then the AI can come in and through a program, I have no idea what it is, can reassemble that, and so now they're translating some of these. And you
Yeah,
sent me
that article had it
Yeah.
on, showed some pictures of it, and
Right.
with some of
Yeah.
it being translated. I just thought it was interesting, you talked about last week. Now here's an article in National
Right,
News.
right. And that's the same guy doing that's the guy that's worked with my stuff, but didn't get he had some problems. It mainly the problems are he needed more money to do better stuff, which he's being afforded that for this project. So hopefully we can revisit that. See with my scroll, I have a scroll from the 2nd century, which is a nice Greek scroll, but it's sealed. I mean, I can't open it. It's too fragile. But there's Greek on the outside. I'd like to know what it's about. Could be important. You never know. Okay. All right, well, let's pray and we'll dismiss. Father, thank you for reminding us once again that when we come to inspiration, we have to exert some perspiration. Everybody who studies the scriptures studies it diligently. We have inherited from godly men and careful scribes the Word of God. And yet, Lord, because of those who know about differences in text and have different systems of belief, basically they lack faith, Lord. They just simply don't trust you. They go with their natural abilities and what they've learned. They want to challenge these things, and we need to have knowledge and information to be able to counter this so that we can, with real authority too, say that your word is your word. So I just thank you for having revealed the Dead Sea Scrolls 75 years ago, that made that possible, especially as we have such a critical age we're in today. No, there's so much more, and it's all a gift of grace. Be with us this week as we try to live out your word. Give us strength, give us grace to be able to just do what you want us to do to your honor and glory. Thank you in Jesus' name.